Welcome back, everybody, to the end of the year SUPERFAN Editions. That's right. We are here live tonight, Wednesday, December 12th, the first day of Christmas. My true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree. Look up what that means, people. Each one of those things has a different meaning. I think it's just a stupid song, but it's not. Anyhow, we're live with the Quasi Theorist man himself tonight, Mr. Dean Cooper. Good evening, sir. I was going to call you a ancient alien theorist, but you know,
that would be contrary to my personal beliefs and reality.
Right. You know, because humans are very, very special beings, and they did a lot of things. And to say that aliens did all those things makes it less to be human.
Yeah, really.
I mean, really, it really does. Anyhow, welcome to the Squatchers Lounge podcast. Tonight, we are talking about crazy old monkey people staring at the stars. Is it possible that even as far back as, I don't know, Homo naledi, were they looking at the stars and figuring out that they were on a planet? Tonight, we're going to talk about that live with Mr. Dean Cooper, sir. How you doing? You said you had some pictures you wanted me to show people, right?
Yeah, flip up that Scorpio one first.
The Scorpio. Got that right over here. Let's hope we don't crash. Bingo. All right, we're in good shape.
Okay, now, the reason I came up with the idea for this show with me as a super fan was because over the past 2 years, a couple of different archaeologists and astronomers started collaborating on figuring out what all these old pictures and carvings are. To cut it short, on the left side, you will see what's obviously a scorpion. And that scorpion is from the Göbekli Tepe site in Turkey, where there's that, almost 10,000-year-old circle of stones, pillars with all these carvings on it. But what
it's got 10 legs.
That don't mean they could count, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. In any case, they have, without a doubt, proven statistically that all the carvings in Göbekli Tepe are referring to actual constellations. Some of them from 10,000 years ago are the ones we still are using. And that gets rid of the use for that particular slide, Jeff.
Yeah, we got the next one up here.
That one down.
Mr. Lion.
Okay, now that one, which is the only illustration I've got, I couldn't find out what one this refers to, but that is a 38,000-year-old carving of a man lion, and it corresponds to two of our constellations that were used to be considered one that looked like a lion man. But since we all know those constellations don't really look anything like what we say they are, people have making up pictures in the sky for a long time.
Exactly. I mean, the constellations, what are they? They're not anything. They're points drawn between random stars that might not even be in the same galaxy.
But these scientists have proven is that the constellations, many of which are identical with the ones we use now, like particularly in these cave paintings. There's the one really famous one at, I forget the name of the cave, but it's in France. It was the earliest ones found, in which there's an aurochs up on the ceiling.
It would be La Cave, the Français.
La Cave. Lacaux, if I remember correctly.
La Cave.
They've demonstrated that it's an aurochs, which is an early ancestor of our cattle. And it's a male, and it does correspond to Taurus the bull.
Taurus
in the zodiac. So 38,000 years ago, there were human beings, and these were Homo sapiens that were keeping track of constellations way down in caves.
And you know, we're talking about 10,000, 38,000 years ago, and we're talking definitely within Homo sapien lines. But even before that, you know, we never used to give, I personally never used to give even Neanderthal man any credit whatsoever for like socialism. Not socialism as we're giving away everybody's money, but you know, making society. I never gave them any credit for, you know, for art. I never wanted to give them any credit for music. And you know, they've proven that no, they didn't make the flute. However, it's very possible that they put the reed between their thumbs and blew through it to make music and entertain the children at night. You know, and
there have been carved little toys and things that are definitely from Homo neanderthalensis. Neanderthal man was doing art even if he wasn't painting in caves.
Right. And when we talk about Homo neanderthalis, you know, Neanderthal man, now we also have to talk about these other species, like in the cover art for the show tonight, you know, the Hobbit man, you know, Homo floresiensis is now within that same time period of Homo sapien. It lived during the time period of Homo sapien. Was it too staring at the stars and going, oh, well, that must mean something deeper. We need to pay attention to that. Or is it a matter that they notice that every time the fish are abundant, certain stars are in the sky, and that's what they start looking for is when those stars come up.
It gets more interesting to me in that they've also demonstrated that these cave paintings, first of all, they're keeping track of the equinoxes. That's right. Winter and spring, and equinox means equal night. So it's, you know, when the days and nights are equal, they're keeping track of that with great accuracy. And the fact that they know have all these other constellations along the zodiac, they also are keeping track of what's called the precession of the equinoxes. Okay, we all know, I hope, that the Earth wobbles on its axis. It wobbles.
That's a dig at you flat earthers out there. Okay, yeah. If you guys are flat earthers and you're watching this show, you're probably watching the wrong show. But yeah, so thanks for being here anyhow. We love you.
The points of where the winter and spring equinoxes occur, therefore also wobble. Now, because these paintings go back to 38,000 BC, they have demonstrated that the equinox, you know, it's not like it suddenly goes, foom, it's here, foom, it's there. No, it's gradually precessing, going backwards. And they've statistically proven that we humans have been keeping track of the equinoxes since 38,000 BC. So it's not just constellations, but it's star movements and the rotation of the Earth.
And if you take that theory, you know, a few steps further, now we have to add in the heliaxial movement of the Earth and the sun and the stars and the planet through space, where we are now is nowhere near where we were 38,000 years ago. And they, even though as per year time went on, you wouldn't notice that much of a change as to where Taurus is. Eventually, over time, Taurus is going to move in that time space.
Taurus won't look like Taurus because you'll be looking at that grouping of stars from a
completely different position. Exactly. So that's why it isn't necessarily that Taurus isn't there. It may be there, but our view of the night sky has changed in such a way that we can't see it.
Those stars themselves are moving in different orbits through the galaxy.
Exactly. They have their own heliaxial movement.
The Earth, and this is actually going off topic quite a bit, but I think it's a cool mental conception. Well, the sun is spiraling through the galaxy, and the planets are more or less trailing behind it in their own spirals. The sun itself moves up and down to the plane of the galaxy.
Well, that's important in what we're talking about, in the fact that these ancient peoples who had no concept of that whatsoever were still able to pinpoint the same constellations that we see out in our night skies today. But how far back does that realization go? I mean, is it, if a Sasquatch is the fifth chimpanzee, like one of my hypotheses is, could he be very well at that edge of intelligence where they could realize by looking at the night sky that that the equinox is coming? They might not recognize the ox as a constellation, but they very well could recognize the position of the moon, lining up with certain stars to equal the salmon run is coming. So
all you have to do is live in an area where you've got some hills or mountains or maybe some big old trees that have been around for hundreds of years, and you can use those as reference points.
Sure.
If you're looking, well, this star's going here, and that one's aligns with that big old tree there that's been there for the last 200 years or so.
Well, that's pretty much what they decided that Stonehenge was built for, was because the land was now barren of trees, so they needed something more constant to always remember the equinoxes are coming. What is it, the Kublai Khan temple? Yeah, the temple that has the drawing of the Kublai Khan in Mexico, that the snake comes down the staircase. Yeah, I think I'm thinking
Khan was
Mario character.
The Genghis Khan. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought he was a Mario character.
Khan and Quetzalcoatl.
But the snake comes down the staircase there in Mexico during the equinoxes and goes the other way during the other equinox for the year.
That one was actually predates the Aztecs. The Aztecs didn't really know who was living there before that, so they don't really know who built that.
Well, right. The Aztec society moved in on whatever was lost before them.
Somebody lived there, and they're not sure how long ago, but it was a couple 3,000 years maybe. Estimates.
And you go back and look at the same thing. The pyramids. There's pyramids all over the planet. It's not just in Egypt. There's pyramids on every continent nearly, except for Antarctica. And we're probably there. We just haven't seen them because they're under the snow. Because the aliens built them.
The aliens would have had to do that one, or some sort of ancient dinosaur race or something.
Now they're claiming that there's pyramids off the coast of the Bermuda Islands, out there in the Bermuda Triangle, but there's no news footage of them. So I'm still trying to figure out why the news.
You've kind of led into another thing that I'm pretty sure about. Well, first of all, in these, I found that these guys have actually published this work in one in a journal in 2017 and one just recently this year. They think, well, there's two things they're quite sure of. One, some of the dates that are within, like 100, 200 years, they're sure of, especially in the caves, because they can carbon date the paintings.
Well, now with the eDNA setup that we have, they should be able to pull species out of these caves that they're finding cave drawings in. They literally should be able to pull, what species of, it's so weird in 2018 to say this, but what species of human was really there, because we never wanted to admit that those that came before us, were human, but in their own way, they led to what humanity is. And without them, we wouldn't be what we are.
Yeah, the cave paintings, those I know have been identified mainly as Cro-Magnon. But talking about Cro-Magnon, the way human beings view race is actually fairly absurd. The genetic difference between, say, Jeff there, or me, and a pygmy tribal person in Africa is almost nil. It's so small that, you can find it, but it's less than the difference between two dog breeds.
Right. And in the same token of that, 21% of me is banana. I share 97% of my gene pool with the common rat. Because we're mammals. There's a million things that you share that DNA with. But what I tell people all the time is it isn't what is the same, it's what is different that makes us human. There's lots of the same on the planet. I honestly believe now in this day and age, in 2018, the way I look at our ape cousins, especially chimpanzees and orangutan and gorilla, as they are as an adult of a man in my 40s, look at them completely different than I did as a child, seeing circus performing chimpanzees and orangutans at the zoo. I really, those were great experiences for me as a child. Now as an adult, they're so very sad, because not only do we have to give those things that we want to keep for ourselves as humans to Cro-Magnon and Erectus and Neanderthalus and Denisovian and Homo floresiensis, but we also kind of have to give most of those traits over to our great primate cousins as well, the chimps, the bonobos, the billy apes. Now there's two types of orangutan. There's the Sumatran orangutan and the new orangutan that they identified over there. And there's thousands of them. There's like 10,000 of these things. It's not like one or two. I mean, it's an old species of orangutan that was just discovered. We have three different types of gorilla. They just discovered like another 60,000 gorilla in Africa. I mean, it's a wonderful friggin' thing. It's like, wow, holy crap. They're not as endangered as we thought they were. They were just so smart that we never found them.
Yeah, not being the guy whose show this is, there were two other things on the basic topic of the show that I found really interesting. One, they have also correlated things in the cave paintings, stuff at Gobekli Tepe, that were marking when there were big natural disasters that seemed to correspond with big meteor strikes, things like that. And the other thing which is interesting, I don't know what we can do with that in terms of understanding them, other than that, damn, they are astronomers.
Right.
But they also are pretty sure that our ancestors back then were using the constellations to navigate. Now, they did not say navigate the water, but to me, it makes a great deal of sense.
Well, yeah. Now we have to wonder. Were Erectus and Neanderthal, were they building reed canoes and navigating the island chains?
Neanderthal was completely capable of it. We're not probably
right. They
going
wore
to find
furs.
evidence.
I mean, they wore furs and trapped, and they lived in colonies. I mean, they were far more developed than what they were believed to be when I was a child.
But you look at Homo erectus, and you've got Homo erectus on Java, some areas of Indonesia, and a number of other islands. How did they get there? Because many of the islands around they're part of a different continental plate.
I hate you all. I'm going to float away to somewhere better. Screw you.
They chipped stone tools, and not slightly off in a different direction, but they used red ochre. And our ancestors used red ochre for painting, for dyeing their own skin.
Yeah, for ornamentation, which is another thing that everybody wanted to save for Homo sapien. Everybody wanted to say that, it wasn't until Homo sapien that we wore like jewelry or ornamentation. And now they find that in a lot of the sites, that's not the case.
Yeah.
If they had stone tools, they were capable of carving canoes.
They could do dugouts, if nothing else. Yeah.
Right. Anything, any kind of wood that would float, they would be capable of. They had use of fire. Now that we know that the use of fire goes all the way back to Homo naledi, then we have to assume that it comes all the way forward through all of the upright species that walked after them. So if you have the ability to control fire, you can make any shape you want out of wood.
Yeah.
I mean, just like we have our metallurgists now, like I tell people, blacksmiths and metalworkers are wizards. In the 14th century, those men were protected. If you were a good blacksmith and you knew what you were doing, you worked for the king, you were a wizard because you could do things with metal that nobody else could. The alchemists were the same way. I would think that if you could control fire back in those days, that you would be you would be really worthy of a healthy place in the tribe, because I doubt that everybody would control the fire.
When these guys said navigation, I immediately popped back to my biology geology major. And when you study geology in the general Chicago area, the Midwest, what you're studying is well, you're studying glaciation, the effects of glaciers. And one of the things I knew from that was at the height of the last glaciation, the oceans were about 300 or so feet lower than they are now. And on the East Coast, you have the continental shelf that was exposed during that time. They probably were sailing there, and there's no trace of it left now.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, that would be, we would actually have to have conditions return to that time for us to be able to do any type of study of the people that would have navigated the oceans at that time, because they're just too deep for us to try and mess with now.
Astronomically, we are technically in an ice age yet, because it's determined by orbital mechanics. I won't go into details about that, but it's orbital mechanics. We are currently in between glaciations in an ice age.
Because of the heliaxial orbit of the movement of the sun through the...
Because the Earth's orbit as a ellipse around the sun gets longer and gets more elliptical and more closer to a circle. So we move in back and forth. And
are you trying to say that climate change is not a real thing, Mr. Cooper?
I am not. Okay, as many of you know, I am to the left of most leftists, but I am suspicious of human-induced global warming. Now, don't get all mad at me. I just had a lot of science myself, and there are things that make me suspicious of it. And in some cases, I think, well, there's usually about 10, 50,000 years between glaciations. We're about 10,000 years into it now, so sometime in the not distant geological future, we could be heading back into a glaciation. We could do with some global warming.
Right. You know, I guess we are a little far off topic on this one, but I just thought it was funny. The other day, somebody was talking about the. It was Paris. This is totally within popular culture. What's going on right now is what's going on in Paris right now, where the people are revolting against the government for their crackpot friggin' global warming taxes that they were trying to rip these people off for. Until places like China and India and your third world countries in general get their shit together, don't tax me for nothing. Because no matter amount of money you charge me for my little minuscule tax, carbon footprint on the world, China and India is going to wipe that out in about a half a second.
Yeah.
Like a half a second. So y'all got to get them in control before y'all can bother looking at taxing cow farts in California. I'm not kidding. They taxed cow farts in California for global warming. I can't make this shit up. I just can't.
Yeah, put a catalytic converter on them.
Let's take a
anyways, yeah.
Let's take a well, there was supposed to be a picture up on the screen, but apparently it didn't come up. I don't know what happened. Sorry, folks. That happens. Earlier when I put the pictures up about the cave, the Scorpio and the lion picture, but the discussion was intended as such. Anyhow, let's say hi to the people out there in the live hangout chat room tonight so we can give some shout outs to the people that are in the hangout. Yeah. Hey, don't forget to check out the Patreon feed at patreon.com/cryptidcorner. That is where all of the news story content is coming out. And right now I am writing Cannibal Dwarves, and I'm not rushing it because it's coming out beautifully. It really, really is. It's going to be a good adventure. So let's check it out here. First ones I see up in the box tonight is the Squatch Box and Christopher. I forgot to give Christopher a shout out last week. I'm so sorry, man. You need to talk your mom into letting you get your own login for this so that I can see you in the chat room. Natalie Smith, sorry you're having a bad week, sweetie. I hope you feel better. Christmas time's coming. It's the first day of Christmas season. Hanukkah's over. Hanukkah ended on the 10th. So here it is. I guess we can now say Merry Christmas season. Spike Jeff, there, he's in the room with us tonight. Well, he is back with us, Mr. Keith Harden. Hello there, sir. How are you? And Ishmael Coins Bitch Fishman. Hello there. I'm glad you are back as well. Jonathan Doty. Hello, sir. Welcome. Dave Jackson. He'll be coming up with us live next week for the Superfan Edition. Yes, sir. Mr. Dave Jackson. Let's see here. Lance Windsor. That was last week's participant. How you doing there, sir? Sure. Let's see. Let's scroll down here a little bit and see who else is hanging in the room. Mr. Don Rife, there he is. And yes, you are a banana. How you doing there, sir? Yeah, I need my own theme music for this. I'll have to do that now that I'm not monetized. I can do whatever the hell I want, pretty much. It's kind of freeing. It really, really is. It is kind of freeing. There's Lee Scott is in the room with us tonight. Rod Dupree, he's always in the place to be, swinging that hammer, that band hammer around. Don't mess with Rodney. He'll kick your butt right on out of here. There's no doubt about it. Let's see here. There's more people in the house tonight. The Max McCune. How you doing there, champ? Glad you are with us. Let's see now. It's going to do all that kind of weird stuff. Skipped a bunch of people. Now I don't know who the heck is where. So I'm going to try and make sure that I get to everybody before it's over. It's just crap. It's crap. Sam Squanch Rivera. Hello there, sir. Coming in from Florida. Mr. Barry Bishop. How are you doing, sir? Yeah, we'll be having a live hangout afterwards tonight because I ain't got nothing better to do. There's the life and times of JCM. Hope you're feeling all right, man. I told you I had to duct tape parts of that boy to other parts of that boy while he slept. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But I didn't say hi to Barry Bishop. I have now. Reverend Matthew Gaines. Reverend Dean, Reverend Jeff, Reverend Matthew, Reverend Rodney. We got a whole bunch of reverends going on here, man. Now what's going on? All right. Okay. We're going to try. Okay. I guess that is the bottom of the list here. I hope I didn't miss anybody.
There was another reverend in there too. I can't chat a little bit, but
thought so.
His name. Yeah.
The Reverend Matthew Gaines, and then I was looking. Well, when I got booted and crashed, I lost a whole bunch of what went on earlier. So that's what happened there. If I haven't said hi to you, make sure you say hi in the chat room, and I will get you before the end of the show. And tonight we do have another wrap up of Bigfoot campfire story that hasn't been heard in quite some time. But I digress. We are back to it, sir. All right, my fishing partner
how long we've been cranking along now?
Oh, I don't know. We're in 35 minutes. We got another 10 or 15 minutes to fill here. We'll be fine. Yeah. What we're talking about tonight is the idea. How far back does the idea that I'm a being on a planet floating through space actually go? As far as humankind is concerned, the Egyptians knew, the Sumerians knew, pretty much from the time of recorded language, we were aware of the stars and what they did. We might not have known exactly that there were.
You got to throw in the Hindus and the Chinese too.
Right, exactly. I mean, as far back as recorded data, as any type of recorded history there really is, we knew about the stars, and there were people who specifically whose job it was to interpret the stars and to follow the stars and to let people know what was going to happen with the stars and what seasons were coming. So, and now we've gone back to before us cave paintings of the ox in the cave that corresponds with Toro the bull.
Yeah.
Even though we call him Toro the bull, technically we should be calling him Toro the proto bull was.
Aurochs.
All right, whatever. Well, and probably before whatever that was. So here we go back again. We have to ask. I mean, we really don't know much more what is it Cro-Magnon as far back as the It's about as far back as our fossil record kind of goes. But then we have the other side of my Bigfoot theory comes into effect. If Bigfoot is not the fifth chimpanzee, then he has to be the Paranthropus. Okay, and if we look back in the Paranthropus line, and a lot of people go, what the hell's a Paranthropus? Paranthropus literally means besides, okay, separate than, but nearly the same. So we have the Homo line that started out with Naledi as these little friggin' monkey people that kind of went south in Africa, but that's kind of as far back as we know the Homo line goes is back to Naledi. And they're just...
Jeff, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but again, with my background in geology, much of what we have decided about human history and evolution is based on, well, that's where there were fossils.
Right. No, I totally agree with you.
We don't know what was going on, where the glaciers came and scraped everything flat, what was going on out in the continental shelves.
Right, but it still doesn't ask the question. It doesn't change the question of there's always been a Paranthropus species who have been these robust boned, upright walking, slightly different headed. Their heads are differently mounted on the skeleton. They're not quite straight up and down like the humans are, but these large, hairy, big boned, supposedly less intelligent Paranthropus species that through nearly our entire history have always been there until now that we know of. And that's where one of my theories comes into, into play is, Bigfoot very well could be the Paranthropus species that walks besides Homo sapien in the modern day, just in such small doses at this point that they're nearly invisible. You go back in spoken history, the Native Americans in this country, the written history in America doesn't go back, North America here, what we call the United States, doesn't really go back all that far.
Yeah.
The natives that were here before us, they kept beaded records and everything was verbal. Everything was orally told. The stories were, generational and they changed generational. That's one of the things that they won't really tell you. But, the story that my grandfather told me was most likely not the story that his grandfather told him. The moral of the story per se is still the same. The reason for the story is still the same. However, the details may change for the times. And that would have to be how all of this was transferred through the years. What had to have been done through speech.
Yeah.
Because they're not taking them into that cave and showing them that drawing. Because that cave would be destroyed and the drawing would be gone. Because we know how...
You just gave me an idea for next week's Quasi Theory.
Well, there you go. See?
A brief thing right now about it. The Hindu Vedas, are the oldest known scriptures that are written down. But the Hindus say they were initially only chanted. And in studies of the Polynesians, especially in Hawaii and Tahiti, the Polynesians could quote back 10, 15 generations of what they did because they turned it into a rhythmic, nice chant, which is easily memorized.
Right. Even the luau songs and the dances that you see actually tell stories.
Yeah.
And those stories are ancient stories, and the girls learn the ancient dances on purpose so that they can continue that type of tradition that goes on.
Not being sexist, but up until the late 1800s,
most of them were men.
A male thing.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them were dancing men, and they didn't have coconut bras on. It wasn't until the commercialization of the Polynesian islands and the raping of the natives there that we did most of the girl stuff. But anyhow, that's not what this is about. I think it's an incredible thought to sit and really have a conversation, thinking that little hairy monkey people were sitting on a log at night staring off into space.
Yeah.
And somehow communicating what that means to the next generation.
Yes. Yes.
However, they communicated that understanding, grunts and groans, like Gaelic. Gaelic's barely an understandable formation of grunts and groans, usually
I
followed by
know you got a significant amount of Irish in you there,
followed by usually by cane strikes in the head until you follow their directions that you don't understand. But that's the only way it could really have been brought down this entire time, is definitely through communication of some sort or another, which means some sort of language really has to go back.
Yeah, that was another thought I had a few minutes ago, but then went out of my head, but came back in again. The mere fact that you have Taurus the bull drawn on the ceiling in the cave, and we still got Taurus the bull, indicates a continuity of culture.
Yes. And that continuity of culture spread across the world.
Yeah.
Because in every culture, the constellations are nearly the same. They may be called something else, but they're drawn nearly. It's not like on one side of the world, people had, things that look like a house or a wheel or a car or, a train, automotive, and on the other side of the world, they had things like a pitchfork and a shovel and they literally, they could match up, and that would somehow, clerics would be a bad word for that, but it's an understandable word. Sky clerics would be able to communicate that across even cultures, across societies, because
from what I could see there, especially the constellations, even though they might have identified it as a goat or a bear instead, but it's particularly the ones along the zodiac.
Right.
The line that basically the sun travels through.
Right.
Like that. Yeah.
Well, they're staring at that part of the sky because they're begging the sun to come back. These we weren't even sure the sun was coming back in the 1100s. So, so there definitely was an oral communication problem about how the sun worked until about 1350. In about 1350, we figured out how the sun worked finally, that these long cold nights are.
We kind of culturally threw that knowledge out for about 500-600 years, because
and that's funny. That's funny that you say that too, because there are these ancient places, like we were just talking about. The culture moved in on ancient places that were there before them and just took over it and made it their own and changed it in ways that made it their culture. We really don't know what was lost to widespread disease, famine. We really don't know what happened to the cultures before cultures, because there is nothing left of them.
Meteor and comet strikes too.
Right. It's just the ancient sky monkey people, staring at the stars. It's just fascinating to think about. And with that, I think that's going to be a good place to wrap this discussion up myself. If you were going to give them one final thought about tonight's episode, what would that be, sir? Your final thought, as Jerry Springer says.
We have always been human.
Yeah, I would agree. All the Homo naledi sat on a log and stared off into space at the little red dot and went, "That's different."
Yeah, what's that bugger doing, and what does it mean?
And then when Venus came out in the early fall sky, that's different. We have to figure out what that means. Yeah. Okay. And with that, I'm going to give you guys a Bigfoot campfire story to end on. Dean, sir, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I always love doing the show with you.
Yeah, I enjoy pontificating, as everybody who watches the show knows.
Pontification. That's right. Right here on the Squatchers Lounge podcast. That is a $20 word. And with that, thank you everybody for being here. I'm the Reverend Jeff Kelly. Check out the Patreon feed at patreon.com/cryptid corner and enjoy this Bigfoot campfire story. Welcome once again to another Bigfoot campfire story. When a man and his brother decide to investigate some strange encounters on their neighbor's farm, they never expected the myth to come to life. Let's hear their story. Ellie and Tom lived a couple of farms over from us. I had caught up with Tom at the farmer's market. He wasn't looking so good. I asked him what was going on, and he said in all of his years he had never been kept up at night by the animals until this last week. Tom had found one of his goats killed near the tree line, and his liver and organs had been taken away. Something left the rest of the carcass right there. Tom, not to let anything go to waste, brought the goat back to his barn to butcher and put in the freezer. He had hung the goat by the hind legs on the door of the barn by some heavy rope and went inside to get his butchering knives. When he came back, the goat was all but gone, ripped right off of the ropes, and no sign of anything left behind but the top parts of the leg. Tom was baffled as he had raised it up some 4 feet off the ground, and no other animal could really have taken it down. That night, while getting ready for bed, Millie came down into the parlor and told Tom something was out messing with the barn. So he grabbed his rifle and he dashed out the front door. Sure enough, a bear or something was near the door, so he rang out a shot right near it. Only this wasn't a bear. It stood up on 2 legs and turned around and looked at Tom, let out a blood-curdling scream, and Tom let out another round, and it stuck right in the animal's top of the right leg. The animal screamed off, whimpering in pain, and that was 3 nights ago. Ever since, it keeps hanging around the house at night, screaming and hollering every few hours just to let Tom know it was still around. That was when Tom asked if I could help him put it out of its misery. The next day, I invited my brother Al to join us, and we drove up to Tom's just before dark. Tom had us bring a couple of more guns as he was determined that this was some sort of monster. Well, we had set out behind the barn looking for tracks or a path, maybe a bedding area or something in the animal, but nothing, not even a broken stick. But Tom swore on his wife's life that this thing was out here, injured and dangerous. Well, after a couple hours of hunting around and not an unnatural sound in the woods, we decided it was time to give up, and maybe it had just moved on. We had gotten all the way back to the barn when Al heard it first, a faint scream off in the distance. Nothing that I wanted to go chasing in the dark, but then a few minutes later, it was much louder and right near where we stood. All of a sudden, there was more than one that we were dealing with. Tom had begged us not to leave, and Al and I were curious now. We had to see what this thing was, so we split up and decided to try and surround it. With every step I took closer, the noises, I could hear it breathing. It was heavy and harder and faster, and as we closed in on its path, it was a patch of high grass. It was positive that the creature lay beyond it. So we all went in together. Tom lit up the area with a spotlight, and there before us was a bigfoot the size of a teenage boy. Covered in a looking brown coat of hair covering the entire body, the leg that Tom had shot was not in very good shape, and the animal could no longer walk. It had been laying there for hours as it was broken, and the back open of the wound was now bleeding out. Al raised his rifle to put it down, but there was no need, as it was apparent the animal was dying already. But everybody had forgotten the far-off scream until it rang out some 100 yards from where we stood. We immediately turned to see where the scream had come from. When Tom lit up the area, there stood a much larger Bigfoot, screaming and panting as if it had run a very long distance and was now moving in on where we stood near this now nearly dead and dying Sasquatch. We all got our faculties about us, and we quickly moved off from the creature. The animal had now reached where the younger one was laying, and it had already expired. We stood there and we watched as the bigger animal tossed the body across its back and began to make its way back into the forest. Tom, Al, and I stood there not knowing what to say next. As the creature walked out of our sight, we all turned and walked back to the barn. None of us said much on the way back. We weren't really sure how to feel. Finally, Tom had said thank you to both of us, and he broke the silence. Tom asked what we thought it was, and like Al, I agreed that there was no doubt that Bigfoot was real, and as any other animal in the forest. Al and I decided to drive home, and we agreed that there would be a time to talk about this night, but until then, we'd keep it between us. A few weeks later, I ran into Tom again at the market, and he looked well-rested and chipper. When I asked him how he's been, he replied, sleeping like a baby, with a wink and a smile. Well, these poor fellows got more of an encounter than most. It just goes to show, don't shoot what you can't identify, or something like this could happen to you too. Thanks for listening. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you. Hey, couple of late shout-outs there. Our guys see Mr. Donald Fuller got late into the house. Mr. Timmy Niger, how you doing there? Karen Robb showed up in the house a little bit late as well. And there is the Hunter. Hello, Mr. Hunter. So glad you are with us tonight as well. Glad you guys were here for the show. We will see you next week. That's right here, 8 p.m. Pacific, with our guest, Mr. Dave Jackson. And with that, y'all ain't got to go home, but you got to get the hell up out of here. Love you. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next week. May the Squatch